Hi, friends. We're going to another eyeshadow palette video. Anastasia Beverly Hills Rose Metals. When I first saw the name, the concept, 90s grunge inspired eyeshadow palette, I was in. But what drew me in further was the fact that I surprisingly encountered this in Nordstrom. Wouldn't think they would have it out. Swatched one shade. I'll show you which one it was. I believe it was Nova. And once I did, it was one of those like, oh, okay. Didn't expect that. Well, shame on me because I love Nouveau. And I was actually makeup shopping with one of our fan members, Jenn. She had reached out to me to say she will be in town if I wanted to help her makeup shop. And I was just humbled and flattered at the fact that someone would want to reach out to me and hang out with me. And she was so gracious and kind to buy this palette for me. So thank you, Jenn, so much. Hi! It was a lovely surprise that she offered to purchase the Rose Metals palette for me, and I had to come on here. Well, I was actually going to buy it myself, and she was like, can I get it for you? I'm like, Jenn! So I wanted to come on here and present some looks and just talk about the palette. As you know, well, if you don't know, hi, I'm Alicia. Love to talk about eyeshadows, nerd out about the color stories, textures, how to use the palette. I also have this lipstick from Chanel. Didn't think I would grab this lipstick, but again, Jenn was like, why don't we check out the fall collection from Chanel? I was like, oh no, I stay away from Chanel because I can't. It's not in my budget. I didn't grab anything extravagant, but I did buy a few of their nail polishes as well as this lipstick and the nail polish shades. Well, again, Jenn bought me one. Thank you again, Jenn. So kind. I bought 3 and the lipstick, and 2 out of the 4 shades I wore during the Pat McGrath Lab Celestial Nirvana eyeshadow palette video. Ooh, those browns, the taupes, the browns, the beiges, my goodness me, I couldn't stay away. And this is in the shade 199 Inattendu. And it's the perfect grown and sexy shade where I don't feel the need to apply anything else. It's like a plummy mauve brown, and I thought it fitting to wear with this palette today. So we have the newly released Anastasia Beverly Hills Rose Metals palette. How much does this cost? $55. It says 200% more eyeshadow in each palette, which we saw from Nouveau, as the pan sizes are much larger than earlier Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes, and I prefer this setup more so than like one you would find in Modern Renaissance. And here it is repeated in the Rose Petals collection. I adore the palette. It's like this steel type of crinkly, worn, buffed metallic. Am I off on this description? I have no idea. And we have the rose metal shades, which in many of the social media descriptions presents this curation to be 90s grunge makeup inspired, looking a little more dirty, okay, muted, antique, rusty. And you immediately detect that, I hope, from this swatch. Just the, it's like very earthy, very different from Nouveau. Setting these up next to each other, you can see that Nouveau, a little more whimsical in feel, great textures, formula I think consistent. And what I actually like about the Rose Metals palette is that a few of the metallics in here are very smooth, so much so you can apply them by themselves, buff the edges. I'll quickly show you just briefly and then we'll get into the swatches. Here I applied Element, which is a beautiful smooth bronze. Used my Sonia G Worker 1, picked up way too much because the shadow is actually very soft that you could pick up just enough without having to rub your brush back and forth, and the actual shadow texture just moves smoothly across the skin where again, you could shape it how you like. You could buff the edges, not with a dense brush like I showed, but maybe with a fluffier brush just to kind of smooth the blend. On the other side, I went in with Nocturne, that it's the same texture as Element, but this is more olive. I applied it in the same fashion. What I like though is that you can take the more sparkly shades that have a little more grip, but they also have a little more shine and reflectivity, top it on top either Element or Nocturne, and create a little more dimension there. So you have your base shade that doesn't necessarily have to be a matte. Because these metallics are so smooth, it could be your single shade moment from lash line to crease and even under your lash line. And if you wanted to add that spotlight effect, you could go in with shades like Heavenly, Haze, Rose Fire, or even Nova. Nova is the one I first swatched, and it, again, just looks beautiful by itself. I did take a little bit of Ashes, which is the more taupe matte, to blend the edges of Element, as well as Nocturne, but then I went in with Sun Rose to blend the edges of Element in case you wanted to steer the look to be more warm instead of more neutral cool. And I dig the shades and the balance of mattes and metallics in the palette. So why don't we get into it? And first we have Rose Quartz, which is like a satin taupe shade. Lovely by itself. Royal, a metallic cranberry. Ooh, pretty. Haze, one of the showstopper shades in the palette. Beautifully shiny. Rose Fire, bright copper metallic. Ooh, beautifully smooth as well. I would hold this in the same category as Haze, metallic but a little bit of extra shine, whereas with Royal, a little bit of a more muted finish. This, I think, leans a traditional metallic finish versus like the little more razzly-dazzly metallics in here. Sun Rose. I think this is a matte with like gold flecks in it. I don't mind it, but I do believe the gold flecks makes the consistency a little drier. Not so much, it's very smooth, and there you see it's more like a terracotta brown. Here we go again with Nova. This has a little more texture to it. As you see, you don't need a ton, but oh my goodness me, this reminds me of Gigabyte from Mother's Subversive Mothership 3. Just like that dirty antique look to it. But I think Gigabyte has a little more gold, not gold, it's not gold. I think like a more of a green, and it's brighter because it's a baked formula. Heavenly. Heavenly is your highlight shade from the palette. Inner corner, you want to top this over any of the metallics you previously seen to get a little more reflectivity in the color, so when the light flashes on, it does this. Element, as you saw in the first demo, not like Royal. Man, I swatched it on top of Heavenly. I'm so dumb. Okay, let's do this again. Heavenly, let me put you back. I'm sorry, this is Heavenly. Again, Element, as we saw, not quite the same as Royal. Royal has a little more sparkle in the metallic base, whereas Element is your truer metallic base with no additional flex in there. Ashes. I'm gonna do that again. Our beloved taupe matte. Very soft. It doesn't have any sparkles like Sun Rose does. Beautifully smooth and a versatile shade to pair with any of the colors you see here. Dune. Rusty red. You know, this is like your Vermilion Venom, okay? Auburn Allure from Celestial Nirvana, I think is a little more red. It's a little more red. Nocturne. Nocturne is your dirty olive shade, but more like it's like a steely type of an olive. It's almost like a gray olive. Just gorgeous. And again, as you saw in the demo, just whipped that across the lid in the crease. Didn't need an additional matte, although I did go in with Ashes because I love that combination from the steely olive into the taupey matte. And lastly, we have Noble, a deep neutral brown. So this technically is the deepest color in the palette. Don't know how far it will take you in terms of intensity. we can definitely, well, I actually tried this. I tried a lot of the colors before I came on here, and Noble does provide a little bit of contrast, more so than Metro, right? Because Muse from Nouveau is not a matte, it's a metallic, but it does provide a little bit of depth if you want it. So those are the swatches. I'm pleased with the formula, and the color story I think pretty cool. Before we get into the looks, I immediately thought of two palettes when I dipped into rose metals. The first one being from Isamaya's brand, the Industrial Eyeshadow Palette. It has a similar vibe for sure, because you still have the coppers and the olive antique shades from the Industrial Eyeshadow Palette, similar shades that are occurring in the ABH. The thing is, Isamaya has a lot more of the topper metallic textures in here. There are no mattes in here. So if you love mattes, maybe you'll prefer the ABH palette over the industrial one. I quickly wanted to swatch some shades right on the Anastasia swatches. So this is Brass from the Isamaya palette, and it's hard to see, but Brass has a little more copper to it. It's a little more like burnt, whereas Fire Rose a little bit more orange, true orange copper, and the Brass shade has a little more shine to it because it's a weird texture. You can see it here. It doesn't have like that same pickup as Rose Fire does, so there's a little more shine there. Then we have Motor, which, oh my goodness, Motor and another shade in here. I'm gonna swatch this next to Nocturne. I'm gonna do it right here. So this is Motor. Motor is similar. I think it has a little more, it's like more olive leaning. Yeah. Motor is more olive leaning, whereas Nocturne is like a little more gray olive leaning. Can you see that? I know, these are so bad. I'm so sorry. And lastly, I wanted to swatch Cuprum, which is like the bronzy metallic here, and not the same as Element. So Element is the metallic bronze here. This is Cuprum. Cuprum is like a warmer brown with gold flecks in there. I actually like Element better. Cuprum, it depends on the pickup, because you can see the gold flecks in Cuprum, whereas Element is a smoother formula. It's a little more straightforward, where you just see like the bronze shade, whereas Cuprum, you see the bronze base but gold flecks in the formula. So that really all depends. And lastly, I wanted to present Byredo's Kalahari palette, which I absolutely love still, and compared to Rose Metals, I thought they had similar vibes. Of course, Kalahari has the blues in there. You got 18 shades versus, how many are in here? 12. But I immediately thought of like, let's just see. Ashes, right? Ashes from Rose Metal. And then we have the taupe shade from Kalahari. Yeah, this is a little more cool tone. It looks like Ashes has a little more mauve in there. Sun Rose from ABH paired with, well, this is like a fiery kind of a matte from Kalahari, and the warmer matte, not quite the same. Sun Rose has a lot more orange to it. Dune is like that really red shade, and the other red shade from Kalahari that is almost like a wine versus like a burnt brick. Rose Fire from ABH, and allow me to swatch this shade here, which, you know, looks very similar. So you got another copper moment, but it looks like from Kalahari, this is like, it's almost like a pink copper. The undertone is a little different. Quickly swatching Nova again from ABH next to what I think is a truer olive shade from the Kalahari palette. Let's see here. Yeah, that definitely has more green, where Nocturne is more of a steel, kind of steel olive. I say olive because it does look a little olive in the pan. Maybe it's because it's up against the silvery pan frame that I'm insisting that it's olive and it's just gray. So if you have the Kalahari palette and you're fine with it, you might not need Rose Metals. If you want something more edited, 12 versus 18, then sure. If you already have the Industrial palette, you can definitely come up with similar looks. It's not going to have the cranberry metallic shade or mattes period. If you don't even like matte and you're all about these sparkly metallic finishes, then maybe industrial is a better choice for you. So you just kind of have to weigh out the pros and the cons for each palette and see what is best. Maybe you just don't need any of them. That's also an option. But with all swatches and comparisons out the way, I think it's time for you to come in a little closer. That's enough. I wanted to start off with one of the simplest looks you can achieve. First, going in to ashes, and you could just plop that through the crease. In terms of the formula, I think the mattes are incredibly smooth. There is a lot of kickback in the pan, so just beware. It's just a matter of tapping lightly and no more than that. And you can see that ashes gives me nice shading through the crease. Cooler overall, but doesn't overwhelm the eye and it shapes it a little bit. And then going in with rose quartz, which is the only texture of its kind in this palette. This is a satin finish, beautiful shine on the lid. Very sophisticated and it matches beautifully with ashes. So if you don't want the matte finish on your lid, you can rely on rose quartz to be placed on. If you wanted a little more sparkle, as discussed during the swatches, you could take a touch of Heavenly and just tap that on the center of the lid, and that will immediately bring out more reflectivity from rose quartz if you wanted more shine there. And I can demonstrate that by just flashing the light on. So I'm not sure if it's easy to see, but from under, a lot more glitz when you apply Heavenly on top. You can stop here, apply lashes or just mascara. I'll proceed with some liner, and with that I'm taking Noble and stamping it here along the lash line. If you need a little more contrast, a little more intensity, then I would go in with a separate pencil. What comes to mind is, of course, my beloved Pat McGrath Precision Gel Liner in Black Coffee. I would choose that to add a little more intensity because Noble by itself does just have like that brown wing look to it, right? If you want a little more color, then I would again go in with the pencil that's darker, but I think that's also nice on its own, very light, easy to achieve. If you wanted to place something on the inner corner, you can go back in with Heavenly, tap that on the inner part of the eye. You could wrap it in under your lash line. I like to place shadow under my lash line, so either rose quartz or ashes will do, right? If you want a little more shine, then you can go in with rose quartz instead. And don't mind me, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and it's a little better. I mean, it's not the greatest, but it's fine. So that is look number one, and I think one of the simplest ways you can approach this palette, or even skipping what we did, just apply Heavily on your lid. That's, I think, great if you wanted a little sparkle on the eyes, but you didn't want to go in with a matte color through your crease or have another color on the lid. Heavenly will provide really nice reflectivity while not overwhelming the eye look. Wearing that by itself or placing either Noble or even Dune along the lash line. Heck, you can even use one of these smoother metallic formulas to draw your wing liner because the texture allows for you to do that. On the other side, well, let's start with Royal and taking my Builder one. This is a little tighter than Element and Nocturne. Nocturne, if you have this palette, those two shades are much smoother because Royal has the sparklies in there. It just makes it a touch bit drier, which is not a big deal, but just know it's not going to be the same experience as Element and Nocturne. And not using additional product, just taking my blender here, moving the shadow through the crease, and look how beautiful that is. Very simple. I mean, you could just stop there, right? If you just wanted that light dose of cranberry. But if you wanted more color, take your finger now over the lid, and that's going to look more pronounced and amplified. And you don't have to worry about blending the edges because you've already done that, and could just rely on your finger tap to work the edges of your finger application into the blend so it looks seamless. I purposely left a pocket here, not noticeable, because if you wanted to leave this as it is, it's not going to look too out of place. However, if you wanted a little more color on the outer lid, you could take either Dude or Noble. Let's take Noble and lightly tap that on the outer lid here. If you want a little more smoke, if you wanted to introduce another matte to the mix, you can. And I think tapping is the best way, or not the best way, that's an absolute statement. I think one of the easier ways to blend a deeper color if you're not too confident about going in with it first. Wrapping Noble down just a quarter of the way in under the lash line. To finish the edges of Royal, you don't really need to because you see here, the blend is pretty nice on its own, but you're more than welcome to go in with any of these mattes. Ashes is going to give you a little bit of a cooler gradient. Sunrose a little more spicy. Let's do Sunrose, see what happens. Sunrose has a lot of kickback because of the gold flecks, but just enough. You don't need a lot of this matte. Lightly whipping it on the edges of Royal, and look how beautiful that is. It's not overwhelming the color, doesn't take over, it just gives you a little bit more. Going in with Royal on the lower lash line to keep it consistent, but I want to go in with Rose Fire. We have to. Rose Fire is beautifully bright. And taking a smaller shader brush here, introducing another shade if you want. I like to, you know how I like to just layer. You could also do Rose Fire on the finger lightly and then tap that on Royal. And look how that produces, it's almost like a flame on the center of the lid. And because Royal has a different finish than Rose Fire is going to give you a little more reflectivity, a little more shine. You don't need a ton, okay? It could just be a very light serving of that shade. Heavenly, it might be the only highlight shade in here. Depending on your skin tone, you could use Rose Fire as a highlight as well, but I think Heavenly is just, you know, meant to be your standout inner corner moment. So with that, I'm gonna place Heavenly on the inner corner, and since it's more of like an overlay shade, I think despite that, pretty good pickup. You just gotta tap and layer accordingly. All right, it's time to put on some lashes and I'll be right back. Here is round one with Rose Metals, a low-key eye, a little bit smoky, but solely relying on the metallic texture and shade to deliver that smoke versus a matte through the crease, which I like that approach using this palette. It kind of forces you to. Maybe that's just me because sometimes I like going in with the metallic first and just using the matte to lightly buff the edges and not necessarily setting up the look with one of the matte shades. And the lipstick color, my goodness, it looks so good with both. Demo number one, I guess this is like demo 1.5 if we include the fast track demo earlier in the video. I would like to do one more, maybe using the more antique gold shades. I definitely want to use Haze because it's so gorgeous. And with that said, I'll see you back here in a minute. Final round. What did I say? We're gonna do Haze. Either with the finger first or with a fluffy shader. Again, with my Builder One, Worker One, Builder One. This has a little more texture than a few of the metallics in here, so you might have to go through a few rounds of whipping on the shade simply because it has a little more stick, not the same amount of glide as Element, Nocturne, or even Royal to some extent. And then you could tap here because again, this is more shiny, but the texture is a little different. So I tap the shade just to shape it through the crease, but now I'm taking more on my finger for a heavier dose of shine here on the lid. That's pretty by itself. Yeah, you can see it travels well on its own. However, I do want to see this paired with Dune. I haven't used Dune in a look yet, so lightly tapping, not a lot. Okay, taking that through the crease. This will present a warmer delivery of a gradient, yeah, but I think that's quite beautiful with Haze. Haze is so cool tone, and then when you introduce Dune, it's like, you know, a little bit of both. We'll take a shader brush. This is my Sonia G soft shader, and then tap Haze higher over Dune so it has that light scatter effect across the matte, and just have your concealer brush on standby for some easy cleanup, but I think that's looking good so far. Taking a little bit more Dune here And I'm just lightly whipping, and look how much color I got on the crease already. My goodness. Heavenly will be a nice pairing with haze. So I'm just tapping that on the inner part of the eye. And I think I want to do Dune on the lower lash line. You can do haze, but I think it'll be nice to have that warmer shade on the lower part as well. What we could do is, yes, have Dune on the lower, but introduce a touch of haze maybe on the center of the lid. To achieve that, I'll grab my reference number 3, which is a pencil brush, and then tapping that right at the center of the lower lash line and gently scattering that right and left, not in a way that's like straight across, not in a direct way, but more so this. Translated to what I'm trying to achieve with this blend right now. If you wanted haze to look more sparkly, tap on a little bit of Heavenly, and that's what that does. Next eye. What shall we do? I think you want to see Nova, don't you? I know. Picking up Nova again with my worker 1. This has a little more grit also. And as I did with haze, just tapping it down first, get the color on the lid. And I like to pull down so I have a little bit more control of the distribution, right? I don't want it to get too high. And then I turn the brush on its side to better shape it here. I do want to go in with Noble. I think that's the color that I want to use next. So I'm wiping a little bit off the brush and whisking it here. There we go. But isn't that lovely by itself if you just wanted to keep it very simple? But taking my finger and applying a lot more color on the lid as I did with haze here. So it looks more prominently antique. Isn't that pretty? And now with Noble, again, very lightly, and throwing that across the lid. And this is a great brush to use, whether it's the Bristle Beauty, there's a Hakuhodo I forgot the number. It looks like this brush. Reference number 16. This has a point to it, which I think great to fit directly into the crease. And it's going to be precise with that blend and shape the shadow in a way that I like, to where it's slightly winged out past the lash point. And now taking Nova across the lower lash line. So let me place that right, just taking a little bit of Noble on the very edges here to connect. Yes, just a little bit. That's pretty. I like that. You know, I'm taking a little bit more Noble, just more generous with that application, getting the very edges of it there. We could do Fire Rose on the inner corner, heavily on the inner corner. Haze. We could do haze. How about, you know what? I'm just going to keep it very simple and do heavily on the inner corner. It's just, you know, the shade is here. Why not? You know what I'm saying? Just one of those things. And again, just to show, heavily on top of Nova is going to give, again, that sparkle, reflectivity, shine. If you want it to appear brighter. Okay. All right. Lashes time. I'll be right back. And here is our last demo using rose metals. I'm happy with the approach again, as I described, going in with the hardier metallic first and just finishing the edges lightly with the matte. I think it's a nice change of technique for me, because I usually go matte first and then metallics after. The reason why I like doing the mattes after for this palette specifically is because a lot of these colors have like that grittiness to them. Grittiness is not the right word, because they have a lot of shine. You have to work the pigment into the skin, and I think if it comes directly in contact with your lid versus it being applied over a matte, it's not going to have much to latch onto, and you might blend it away. That is why I like to establish the main stage shade first on my lid by first applying it with a shader and then going in with my finger to amplify the intensity intensity lightly then with a matte shade for the edges. And I think that's a nice technique to use with this palette. You could go however you like, especially if you just wanted to use the softer metallic shades standalone, not necessarily having to blend their edges with the matte. And what I think is nice about the palette mostly is that each shade can hold its own. You don't actually have to blend or combine any of these shades together. Ashes is limited in terms of how many skin tones it can serve. When you're getting into Dune, Sunrose, and Noble, you have a wider spectrum of possibility, and I would argue that these shades are great solo also. That just to have Sunrose all over your lid and crease, I think lovely, but these are great supporting mattes in that no matter which you pair them with, I think will be a beautiful look. As an example, again, if you wanted to use Royal on the lid, you could steer it more cool with Ashes, or steer it more warm with Sunrose, or a little more smoky with Noble or Dune. But I really enjoy the textures. I like that antique, just again, grungy feel about these shades. No matter what you apply, unless it's just Heavenly or Rose Quartz, if you apply any other of the metallics in here, the look will be smoky, but it has like a nice approach in that it's not smoky New Year's Eve black eyeshadow. I think it has nice smoke just by relying on the color alone versus the intensity of the color, if that makes any sense. If you're wondering if you need this palette, absolutely not. I just am a sucker for eyeshadow palettes. Again, when I swatched Nova, she had me in her clutches, okay? I could use the Byredo Kalahari. I could have still used Isamaya's Industrial palette. I just used the Celestial Nirvana palette. You know, I got a lot of rose metal moments in my collection. I understand the convenience of having these specific shades in one place and you just kind of grabbing that palette. Do I like it more than Nouveau? I do. That's tough, man. Nouveau is special because I think the color story very clever and really challenges the user to think outside the box, because you got, you know, a little bit of grunge in Nouveau, but you also have the whimsical at the same time. You got some great combination moments in there as well. Ultimately, though, I think these are fantastic together to combine the shades from each. Hello. And going back to rose metals again, Heavenly as like your reflectivity shade is almost like Heavenly is your astral solstice for rose metals. And dare I say easier to use. Astral solstice is a little drier, a lighter of a tap. Because it is drier, it might have more shine, but Heavenly I feel is just a lot more user-friendly, right? It has a lot more stick, a lot more adherence. The shine beautiful. As you saw, you could apply it on any of the colors here and it's going to have like that spotlight reflectivity effect on the lid or inner corner, wherever you like to place it. Overall though, I'm very happy with rose metals. I think it's solid. The shades in here, the formulas are consistent from what we've used and experienced in Nouveau, and dare I say better than previously released Anastasia Beverly Hills palette, in that the mattes I think are softer and easier to blend and you can layer them without the fear of them muddying up as I experienced with a few in the past. So the formula is definitely better, I feel, as I experienced from Nouveau, but from Rose Metals I think it's great. Everything from the packaging to the inspiration concept to the fact that you have an even balance of mattes and metallics in here. Metallics having their own subcategories of being softer, more burnished finish versus more reflective finish. So it's a great time. I hope this video helped. If you have it, that it inspired you to try these looks or maybe explore a little more, or more importantly, because we did the swatches, you had an idea of how these colors looked, maybe you could get into your collection and create your own rose metals moment. I'll see you down in those comments, fam, and until then, that is a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video helped, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up or maybe consider subscribing to my channel. And until then, I will see you on here again with another review tutorial, eyeshadow palette extravaganza, or monthly phase. Take care and I'll see you again soon.